It's Tuesday, August 19th, 2014. We're here in Highlands Ranch. My name is Mark Stevenson. I'll be the interviewer, ably assisted on the video equipment and the audio by Paul McKeague. You are Suzanna with a Z, Ray.
I am.
Will you spell your name for us?
Suzanna. And do you want me to give you the history of that?
In just a minute I will.
Okay.
And will you spell your last name also?
R-A-Y.
The reason we're asking these questions is that if this is transcribed, this will make it a lot easier for the transcription. So as the interview goes on, we may ask you to spell people's names or places, just make it easier for transcription.
For everybody.
That's true. We are here today to get your thoughts in conjunction with the Highlands Ranch Historical Society for a series that they're just starting now called Highlands Ranch Then and Now. So our intent is to interview people who have a knowledge of the Highlands Ranch area as it's now known, or the actual Highlands Ranch, which you have familiarity with, as I understand. So we would like to ask you some questions today and have you tell us some of the specific memories that you might have. We have some questions, but this will be fairly open-ended today.
Okay.
You do acknowledge that we will ask you after the interview to sign a release.
I do.
Giving us the rights to use this content in various ways for the Highlands Ranch Historical Society or other entities that might be using this to archive this content.
Okay.
Our intent would be as a repository, we're intending to use the Douglas County Library facility that's done this with other communities throughout Douglas County. So are you agreeable to that?
I am.
So if you are, we want to thank you for that in advance. We had a lovely visit on just last Friday where you had the opportunity to come back again and
tour the
places
mansion
where you used to live.
I did.
At this point, and where you had friends and family. So we'd like you to share some of those memories with us today. It would help me in particular if I understood how you're related to the Phipps Mansion, as we call it today, or the Highlands Ranch Mansion.
Okay, Lawrence Clinton Phipps was my grandfather.
This is Lawrence Phipps II?
Junior, yes.
Junior, okay. He was your grandfather, and how was your father or mother related to Lawrence II?
My mother was his eldest daughter, one of three children, Mary, M-A-R-Y, Hart, H-A-R-T, which was her mother's maiden name, Phipps.
Okay. Lawrence was married more than once, from what I understand.
Yes, he was.
Which marriage was this?
This was the first marriage.
And your mother was the eldest child of the first marriage of Lawrence?
Yes.
Okay. I understand then. Our understanding is that the Highlands Ranch itself was purchased by Lawrence Phipps II somewhere in the late 1930s. We've heard 1937 as a date from that.
That's correct.
Does that fit with your recollection?
Yes, it does.
Okay. So tell us your earliest memories of how it related to the area around what we now call the Highlands Ranch Mansion.
Okay, when our house was being built, it is now known as the Chum Howe house. We'd like to rename that the Mikey house or something more appropriate.
So who built the house?
I found out from my brother Chan that we disagreed who architected that house. I thought it was designed by Caspar Hegner, who was a very good friend of my father's and was a friend for years.
Okay, can you try to spell that for us?
Caspar, C-A-S-P-E-R, Hegner, H-E-G-N-E-R.
Okay. And it was commissioned by your father and mother?
I believe so. And it was built, it's a double brick house. My father at the time was working for I think what later became the Robinson Brick Company, or maybe it was the Robinson Brick Company at that time.
Okay.
So that is a very interesting building technique. It's called double brick, and it insulates with an airspace between the two layers.
Why was the house built there?
It was my understanding that grandfather deeded 1 acre around that house, and my mom and dad built that house.
And they didn't choose to live in the mansion itself?
No. And when I was first born in December of '38, grandfather had acquired the property. I lived in what was known now as the Marion Morgan Cottage while that house was being built.
Mm-hmm. And where is that house relative to the mansion itself?
The cottage?
Mm-hmm.
The cottage is one of the 2 buildings that was associated with what we call the headquarters.
Is it the nearest building or the second from that?
It's the second house up as you enter the headquarters or the cattle area.
Okay, good. So what is, realizing if you were born in '38, it's hard to probably ask you what was your earliest memory?
Well, my earliest
that area.
My earliest memory was of Maud Swafford, her husband Robert Swafford, and if you need me to spell that, it's SWAFFORD. Robert Swafford was a champion roper, and he always had in his office a great big long picture of him and all the people at the National Western Stock Show.
Mm-hmm.
That was very fashionable at that time to take these panoramic photos. And so my grandfather hired Robert not only because he knew cattle and could tell one from the other, but that he was a very good roper, and he needed that skill to work the cattle when we did the branding and the dipping and that sort of thing.
Understand. And your memory is of him and that picture?
Of him and his picture, because I lived. Maud Swafford, his wife, I named Cocky, and everybody on the ranch called her Cocky, C-A-U-K-E-Y. From that time forward, she was always known by that name.
Where did they live relative to where you were temporarily staying?
They lived in the first house. As you go
in the second temporarily?
No, while our house was being built.
How long was your house under construction?
I would imagine a year, maybe, a year and a half. I have no idea. That's why we need to research the architect of that house, if you have the resources to do that.
We'll find out if we do.
We will find out if you can.
So your earliest memory was living in the temporary house, and at some age, in the early 40s, I would guess, you moved into the young house.
The young house.
The young house.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
which later became the Chum Howe house.
And we do have a picture of my brother Chan, who is Chapman III, my older brother, and myself standing inside the fireplace at that residence.
The fireplace of which house?
Of the young house.
Of the young house.
Of the young house.
Mm-hmm.
So that...
Was it a large fireplace like the one at the mansion?
No.
Or was it smaller?
It was a very small one.
So you must have been very small at the time,
Oh,
too.
I was not even, maybe not even 2. Who knows?
Yeah.
And because photographs become part of your memories, it's almost like you were there. And there's another picture that I still have somewhere. I think it's in my high school graduation book, of myself wearing a pair of hand-tooled cowboy boots commissioned by Robert Swafford. At that time, they did not make children's size boots. They were very, very big in the 50s, if you remember, the Roy Rogers period.
Oh, yeah.
And everybody had Roy Rogers cap guns and Roy Rogers boots. But when I took that picture, and I don't think I was even 2, I was in those, and I still have those boots to this day.
So Robert commissioned and found a local bootmaker?
Yes.
So you could have been Dale Evans.
Heaven's sakes, yes.
Yeah, I remember those from the 50s too.
Yeah, but at the time those were made. See, if I was born in 38, say this is 39, 40, those boots in that period didn't come in until 10 years later.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the family when you moved into the Young house. Tell me about the family of who lived there.
My mother, my father, and Michael was born in July of 41. And of course, the war hit. My father went into officer training.
What was your father's name?
Chapman Young, Jr.
And your mother's name?
Mary Hart Phipps Young.
Okay. And tell me, who were your brothers and sisters?
Before the war, only three of us. My brother Chapman, who we called Chan, C-H-A-N. Myself, Susanna. I was known as Susie, or Susie Cucumber. And Michael, and he was always called Mike.
Okay.
And 36, 38, 41. Then the war happened.
A few changes, I suspect.
Yes, we left the ranch. One of the memories that I have, and I know this was, as we left, we went down the West Road, and they were using the old thrashing machine. This is where you had to throw the pitchfork, the wheat in by pitchfork. It went down through some whirling blades that cut it up. And I remember that so vividly because I've always been fascinated with machinery and how it works.
Okay. So you had ultimately 3 children and of your siblings, you and 2 siblings, and your parents who lived in the house. How long did you live in the house?
We lived there until my dad left, and as I said, Michael, the whole time that we traveled around during the war, was so small that his cradle was either a dresser drawer or a suitcase. And so we were all small. I think I might have been, if he was 1.5, that makes me maybe 3, Chan 5.
Okay. So after the war, did you return to the house?
We returned to the house. My sister Melanie was born in January of 48. She died of infant crib death, which they still have around now. She died just short of a year. My brother Gregory was born in January 46. My brother Stephen was born of November 50, and my sister Pam, January 52.
Large family.
Up 7 children, 6 still living.
Yeah. So when did you finally move out of the house? As you got older in time, I suspect we'll talk about your background. But
yeah, my first 2 years of high school, my father at that time was driving into Denver every day. He was then a part of something called the Eaton Young Lumber Company, and that's a history in itself. The Phipps, you've heard of Garrett and Bromfield?
I'm sorry, heard of what?
Garrett and Bromfield Real Estate?
I have not.
You have not? Okay. Those 2 gentlemen married my great-grandfather's 2 daughters by his second marriage. And their names were Helen and Dip. I think Dorothy, probably, and we called her Aunt Dip. They married Garrett and Bromfield. And after the war, because they were in real estate, and there was the big push for what are we housing all of these millions of new families coming out of the war, they sent my father to the Northwest to procure lumber in some way because they needed that as their primary building tool. he purchased a sawmill,
Where was the sawmill?
Eugene, Oregon. And he went into business with an Army buddy by the name of Hank Eaton, and they called it the Eaton Young Lumber Company. Hank handled a lot of the sawmill operation up in Oregon, and my dad handled all the wholesaling in the Denver area.
So the product was
Lumber,
secured and cut in Oregon and shipped to Colorado
and shipped
to build homes.
and swapped with other facilities, like we swapped lumber for toilets, we swapped lumber for electrical wiring, so that with these other enterprises, so they built huge, tremendous tract homes right after the war. And I bet I could drive to some of them today.
Good. Okay. Well, tell me a little bit about your actual memories of the Young House. You probably have more after the war.
Oh, yes.
Tell me about the house.
Well, that house was very unique. It had 5 semi-levels, which is kind of
We've heard
unusual.
of tri-levels before, but 5 levels is a little unusual.
But they were staggered. No staircase was more than 6 or 7 steps. So that was built like this.
Was that designed that way for a particular reason?
I believe because it was an interesting concept. The bottom garage level had an apartment for domestic help. It had the furnace room, it had the pantry, and of course the garage. You could drive right into the garage and take your groceries in, and only had to go up 7 steps to the level where the kitchen and the main room was. And we have a south wing off of that was always sort of our guest wing. And my Aunt Sue Prosser, she really wasn't an aunt, we just called her that. She was a music professor at Queens College in New York, and she used to come out every summer and stay in that south wing. The rest of us lived up the next level. Let's see, here's the garage, here's the living room, and the south wing.
The kitchen's on the second level as well?
Oh, well, on the main level, because see, I think...
Is the main level the second
See,
level?
because the ground sloped,
Right.
as all ground slopes. Look outside this clubhouse. They must have built that lower road down a gulch. And left. This is why Highlands Ranch is so interesting. It was crossed with gulches all over the place. And in the design of the placement of the homes, the builders of Highlands Ranch had to work with the topography the way it was. And they did an excellent job of that. And you get to live in a community.
How many bedrooms were there?
Well, we had the guest bedroom, as I said, on the kitchen living room level. On the next 7 steps up, we had my parents' house on the west. On the east face of the building, we had what we called a playroom, a bedroom, and 2 bathrooms. And so that house actually had 5 bathrooms.
Very unusual for the time. Yeah, I've heard many stories from my wife as well as myself of 4 kids, 1 bathroom to share for everyone.
Yes.
So having 5 was pretty unusual.
And I have written extensive little essays for the Highlands Ranch Historical Society on some children are raised bilingual. I was raised bi-economic. I went to a school that had outhouses. I had friends who had no electricity and chamber pots and outhouses. And as a child, it's just like a child who's speaking French to the cook and Spanish to the gardener and German to the housekeeper. you just slip from one to the other and you don't think there's anything peculiar about it.
Tell me a little bit more about the domestic help that you might have had at the Young house.
It was sporadic always. What domestic help my mother really associated with, and one was my very first babysitter when I was living in the cottage. She was a maid directly from Kansas. Her name was Beryl Roach. And my mother kept in contact with her for years and years and years.
Will you spell her name, if you can?
Yeah. Beryl was spelled B-E-R-Y-L, as everybody in her family was spelled that way. And Roach is R-O-A-C-H. So my mother kept in, and another person I remembered that she corresponded with for years was I think she was a war widow. Her name was Lois Wilson, and she had a little girl named Anne. And I know that we received pictures. Lois sent us pictures of, here's Anne, her high school graduation pictures. So my mother did, but it was sporadic. Occasionally we had couples. Sometimes we had whole families. Sometimes we had single women with children, such as Lois.
The family you just mentioned, who had the daughter, what was her role?
Oh, as my mother's domestic help? You mean Lois Wilson? Oh, just doing the cooking. Somebody's got to watch the kids while somebody else does everything else. Mm-hmm. You really can't do both jobs simultaneously.
It's hard.
It's very, very hard. And so, because my parents could afford it, if they could get it, and of course it was very sporadic, there were periods of time when they could get no one. I remember another family named Hawks, husband and wife. He was very, very helpful because that was about the time I was old enough to have chickens as a 4-H project. And he was the one who did the butchering. I think as a very tender 4th or 5th grader, I would not have been capable of decapitating a chicken. So he did that, but I did a lot of the plucking. And of course did all the eggs.
Did you have a role in raising the chickens?
Oh yes, I was the chief. I was responsible for the watering, the feeding, gathering the eggs, watching after them.
How many did you have approximately?
I would say I probably had a couple of dozen hens. At that time we took had only one or two, I think only one rooster in a hen house. But we would give tablets and make capons out of any male chickens. They made the best eating.
And where was the chicken coop relative to the house?
The chicken, well, it was a chicken yard. The chicken coop was a converted playhouse that had been built for me as a child. And it became our chicken house because it had a man-sized door that you could actually walk into.
And where is that, or where was that relative
Well,
to the
that
house?
was just immediately south of our driveway that came up to the Chum Howe house.
It's no longer there now.
No, and it was in the cherry orchard. It was under a pine tree, and maybe I want to go out.
Same pine tree that's there now?
Yeah, there are several pine trees. The cherry trees seem to have all died, but they were alive. And I found with great interest that those might have been planted. I learned this last Friday by Samuel Long, who, as you were telling me, had a great interest in trying all kinds of agricultural experiences.
He did.
And those cherry trees were mature, and it takes a while for a cherry tree to get up to the size that those were. You actually had to climb up in the tree. They were not little itsy-bitsies. Mm-hmm. And they did not have dwarf varieties at that time. So I hope that answers most of that.
So other areas of the house, what memories do you have? I'm sure you had a living room, you had the
great
The
big...
deck area
Oh, yeah, the
facing
deck
to the
above,
west?
yeah. The deck off the west area of my parents' room, they could roll their bed right out onto that deck, and we used to like to sleep.
No air conditioning back in those days.
Oh yeah, so on a nice, beautiful outdoor, what they call outdoor living now in Colorado. We had a great deal of that. Or we could camp out on the lawn south of the house.
And you did.
And we did.
Yeah.
And the bathroom was designed, I don't know specifically if it was because my mother asked it to be that way, but she had the sink. The toilet was in a little closet, which is very nice, and they ignored that in tract houses, of course. But it's considered an essential feature now in upper-class homes. The sink, and then our baby changing table. There's a large counter just to the right. If they have not changed that or altered that bathroom, I don't think they did.
In 2009, when you came back and were able to tour some of the things around the area, did you have a chance to go into the house then?
Yes, we did, but I do not remember the video guy doing the bathrooms. I think I took him in to the what we call the playroom on that third level, or the 1, 2, 3. That's 4. And then 5 up against 5 up here. So we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 levels in that house. On the level that had my parents' bedroom, on that east-facing wing, we had what was called the playroom, and as I said, the 2 side-by-side bathrooms. And my parents did a very interesting thing. We called it the little bathroom and the big bathroom, because the little bathroom, they raised the floor so that the children could actually get to the toilet.
That's one way to do it.
That's one way to do it, rather than have you trying to climb on stools to wash your hands and to go to the toilet when you're a small child. And I do remember we had a Dutch door so that we could just close the lower half, and Mother would throw us all in the playroom.
A Dutch door is a door divided in
Half, yeah.
half.
So you could leave the upper half open. My mother could hear what was going on. We played in the playroom. We had a closet in there where we kept all our books and games. And that little bedroom that's in that same area that was my room. The boys stayed in the other room until they put my brother Chapman up on the attic level above the kitchen and the south wing. That was where his move up. And they built his train. He built model air. You remember the Lionel train sets? Mm-hmm. Okay, he had a whole train set up. Both of the Lionel trains, and I think the little HO. He got into building a little HO train. He had a whole layout there. And so we progressed, not only as this material or these toys became available. And of course, we still have in our possession down at our Dawson Butte Ranch the piano. It was in the big bay area of that west looking window off the living room. Mm-hmm. So if we can do that. I noticed that they had removed all of the cupboards. That was what struck me as so strongly when I saw the house and got to go in it in '09, was that those closets had been removed. We had a game closet. We had a cold storage closet where we kept all our films and albums and records and all that special stuff up above. On all of that on the north side, on either side of that fireplace that's in that living room.
So you had a piano in the house. Who played the piano?
Well, I did.
And when did you learn, or how did you learn?
I started taking piano lessons about the time my mother had to take me into Colorado General right after the war because I had crossed eyes as a child. In fact, I had my first pair of glasses at the age of 2.
That was pretty unusual for that time.
Very unusual. And it was very interesting. My ophthalmologist was Jack Swigert, who was the father of the Jack Swigert who was an astronaut. And so we had to go to an optician in Denver, down on Curtis Street. Everything was Denver. There was nothing of this.
Nothing in Littleton?
Nothing in Littleton of that kind of a specialty. So even doing our teeth, my first orthodontic work, everything was all down there.
When we do tours of the mansion these days as docents, we say that downtown Denver was 18 miles away and was a full day's ride or a carriage ride in earlier days.
Yes.
Tell me about your trips for medical reasons or otherwise.
Well, we had automobiles in my era. But we still had challenges. I mean, my parents had terrific challenges. How are we going to get these children to school? If you think of, well,
how did they?
How did they? I don't know whether my mother had to drive me down to Blakeland Station, and Plum Creek School, the first Plum Creek School that is now under Chatfield Dam, was a 2-room school, all 8 grades in one room.
How many teachers?
1. Serena Barr.
And how many children?
Well, I had about a maximum of 4 in any grade that I was ever in.
So,
or any of my siblings were ever in, a maximum of 4 grades. So I also can write a treatise for you on the benefits of my education, because we went to this little tiny country school, and yet we did more field trips than most children get to enjoy now. We went up to Waterton, up the back way through Deer Creek to the Denver Water Works. We went to the Mint, we went to the Capitol Building, we went to the State Museum, we went to the zoo, we went to the Phipps Museum of Natural History.
The one in City Park now.
The one in City Park, and we went to the zoo in City Park.
Yeah.
And we got to go to all of those kind of venues. Plus, as I said, this is where my machinery thing, I remember the potato chip factory, Brack's Candy Factory, Gates Rubber Company and making tires.
And V-belts too. And V-belts.
Oh, V-belts, yeah. And I'm trying to think, I don't believe Samsonite luggage had started. At least I don't remember that one. We went to the Danielson Fishers Tower. We went to, got to go up. You could go up in those days. And you could go way up in the dome. They don't allow that.
To condos now.
Yeah. Something very, very interesting. But I was alive when they took everything except the Danielson Fishers Tower down. And I was there when they took out a lot of the downtown area and made 16th Street into a mall. I think maybe I was married.
Urban renewal occurred in the 60s.
Yeah. And by that time, I was married with children. But I remember really being struck with Denver being that big at that time. And
you
then,
remember about the D&F department store, not just the tower.
Oh, yes. Because there was Newsteaders, there was the Denver Dry Good Company, there was the May Company, there was... Sears didn't come along until they built Cherry Creek.
Temple-Ville.
I don't remember that name
He
particularly.
was the architect who developed the first mall in Denver.
Okay, Cherry Creek.
It was on a dump
Okay.
at the time.
Well, Castle Rock built it. Castle Rock built some of its best real estate on top of the Castle Rock dump. So this is what happens when people you know, when they start saying, hey, we have to infill this area. And I was alive when they built the Cherry Creek Dam. And of course I was alive when they built the Chatfield.
When do you recall that being?
Well, as I said, I was in the first graduating class, 1952, from the Plum Creek School. This is the one that still exists and is the bus administration for the Highlands Ranch. I mean, it takes 5. There was a whole room of people administrating and trying to schedule the busing system. And I went back there and everybody was so great. We had a very sentimental moment and I had my picture taken.
Where is this facility now?
You mean the Plum Creek School?
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know what they call the name of the street. I'll have to look it up.
Closer to Castle Rock?
Oh, no.
Where is
As
it?
you go out the west, you can go out West Highlands Ranch. What do you call a Highlands Parkway, which probably goes out right where our west gate went. And you just go up over the hill, and then before you go down the hill to Blakeland and under the underpass.
On Santa Fe.
On Santa Fe.
Mm-hmm.
So you just go in Santa Fe, and I think it might be a mile or 2, and you just take that first left street. No, they have several more that are cutting across there now.
But you called that the Blakeland Hill.
Yeah, and we called it Blakeland Station when I was in the first grade. For some reason, and I don't know if my mother had to leave me there, but this is a memory. I had to wait there until somebody could pick me up. There was a school bus driven by Mr. Barr, Russell Barr, who was Mrs. Barr's husband.
B-A-R-R?
B-A-R-R.
Mm-hmm.
His name was Russell Barr. They had their house and then their daughter Agnes Jacques, which is spelled J-A-Q-U-E-S, later became a teacher, and they had property immediately west of the old Plum Creek School. And we went over to their house a couple of times to make real genuine ice cream.
The crank type?
The crank type, the crank type. And we had 2 outhouses on the property, one for the girls and one for the boys. Those were called 2-holers. And we had 2 large trees, and we could play stink. And we had 2 fences, so you could run from one to the other, called pum-pum pull-away. And the girls played hopscotch. And I don't know what the boys did, just whatever boys do, but the girls played hopscotch. And we had recess, and we had to take all our galoshes. This is back in the days when you had snowsuits, the kind that you had to climb into, and if you ever saw the one about, what was the movie, and I'm drawing a senior moment here, where they had the children all dressed up in the snowsuits, and you were walking like a snow zombie because you had these galoshes and snowsuits.
Christmas Story?
Christmas Story, thank
the
you.
The one set in Cleveland?
Yeah.
Or the guy wanted the air rifle?
Air rifle, the Daisy air rifle, remember that one?
Yeah.
And that is a perfect example of what we had to dress up like when it was winter time. And we had a cloakroom, and we had to take off our galoshes. I mean, it must have taken 15, 20 minutes to take off our galoshes. But we did have recess, and we had to go outside and to the outhouse. So I think we made it really fast. I don't think we had to put on our galoshes for that. I can't remember. Maybe we just tromped through the mud and snow, but the snow was usually like it is now. It can, in this climate, can snow 4 inches, and by afternoon, it's pretty much evaporated.
Yep.
And it was true then, too.
We're talking about the young house primarily.
Mm-hmm.
In the interior, is there any more that you would like to tell us about the interior of the house that we haven't covered yet?
No, just what our play spaces in the house.
You haven't told us too much about the living room or the kitchen.
No. The kitchen had a kitchen. We had a little kitchen table. We had china cabinets on the south wall of that kitchen. It had 2 doors. It had a swinging door into the dining area. And we had a little pass-through for the telephone, all of which I think might still be there. Might still be there. And my activity as an only girl would turn on the record player and I would dance. You know, the Sugar Plum Fairy, we had Tchaikovsky's
Right.
Sugar Plum Fairy on 76s or something, and I had all kinds of fun dancing. Chan was playing with his trains upstairs, and Michael, the best story is one Christmas we got one of those little telephones that one telephone is hooked to the other.
A walkie-talkie?
No, not a walkie-talkie. It was wired.
Okay.
One receiver to the other. These were some of the things. They had little plugs on them so that you could plug one telephone into another telephone, into another telephone. My brother Michael plugged it into the electrical socket and fried. It fried those, but didn't burn the house down. It just melted the telephones. We kept, until they were painted over probably, by the subsequent owners, a corner for each of us, and every year or 6 months as we grew, we'd put a book on the head and make a little.
You think they're still there?
Well, as I said, I'm sure
painted over.
Yeah, I'm sure it's been painted over by subsequent owners, but it would be interesting to see. I know exactly where mine were.
Okay, Suzanna, for the purpose of this interview, though I know it's normal in conversation for you to look at both of us at this point, try to concentrate on looking not at Paul or the camera, but looking at me.
Yeah.
It'll turn out better if you do.
I will.
Yeah. Though I know it's against the grain that normally.
Yeah. Usually you want to include everybody. Yeah.
You want to include everyone, and I understand that's normal to do that, but that's fine.
Okay.
Any other internal of the house memories?
Let's see. Adventures in the house. We always had the influx of miller moths. I'm sure you get this
every year.
Every year, and the big high ceiling in that second or third level had millions of them. My mother's solution was to put a small lamp over a tray of hot soapy water, and it would be filled with bodies the next morning. And that was our regular patrol. We all had miller moth duty. All of us as children had chores.
What were your chores?
My chores were chief cook and bottle washer in the absence of any other source. And as a matter of fact, I was, at one time when my mother was snowed out, and my sister Pam was born in January, so this had to be February or March. They went into the symphony. They didn't make it back to the ranch. I was completely the chief cook and bottle washer and the baby formula maker and the baby feeder and the everything else. So I was the little mother of the house, and grew up as a very responsible type of Capricorn person.
There's quite an age difference between you and some of your siblings.
Yes. Pam was 52 and I was, so she was a baby. In fact, I was mistaken for her mother, or my cousin David, perhaps, when we were in the pediatrician's office. I'm like Capricorn Iusen. I'm silly now, but then I was very serious. So I grew up needing to be responsible. We all needed to be responsible for something. And my parents, very young, at very young ages, assigned us chores.
What chores were your brothers assigned?
Well, let's see, more of them were assigned down at Dawson than up at Highlands, but of course carrying out the trash and the garbage. Mine was the cooking, all the things in the kitchen, vacuuming. I'm trying to think what Michael's chores might have been. You'll have to ask Michael when you do an interview with him. See if he remembers what his chores were. I remember mine very well, and we didn't get stars or anything on a piece of paper like we did at grade school. We always got stars for stuff in grade school. I think they still do that.
When you drew a diagram of the whole properties around that, you described in great detail in your drawing a number of the things on the outside of the Young house. Mm-hmm. Tell us about some of these.
Well, our favorite place to play, of course, was the tennis courts. It was a level, smooth area where we could ride bicycles. A backboard was installed on the north end of the tennis court so we could go up and try to play tennis. We roller skated on the terrace outside of the mansion.
On the north side?
On the north side, and that was flooded and we could ice skate out there.
How often did that occur? Every year? Not every year?
No, I think there were very few years when that actually happened. But it made an impression on us because it was so fun. And then of course all of the barns were a wonderful adventure, from going in the silos with wheat and without wheat, going up in the hayloft of the horse barns and telling ghost stories and other fun things. We did the same with a whole treasure trove of 1,900 vehicles that had been left behind by Springer. I don't think Kistler, maybe his kids played in. I don't know if they did or not.
Springer only had one daughter that lived, Eliza, so there weren't lots of children there.
No.
And they weren't there all the time because they had a house in town.
Yeah.
Up on Capitol Hill, so there may not have been a lot of them.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see who was running their operation then. But as I said, even when my grandfather's day, he had Robert Swafford as the head honcho in the cattle. He had Bud Morgan raising the hay down in the Plum Creek Valley. He had Don Cole on the heavy equipment running the combines and doing the wheat fields.
Cole, C-O-L-E?
Cole, his name was Don Cole. And he was one of the families that lived in the ranch. And I'm thinking there might have been our family and maybe 4 children maximum at any one time. Maybrit Nelson, and I'll tell you about the Nelsons who staffed the mansion from probably when I was in the 4th grade on. That was when grandfather came back from the war. He got his domestic help directly from Sweden. Mm-hmm. And
I was asking you about the immediate surroundings of the Young house. You've mentioned a chicken coop.
Well, it was a chicken house, a chicken yard. Actually, we stretched chicken wire, or the woven wire you can buy now at Lowe's in great big rolls, and just made put it on the iron fence post. The other challenge all over the ranch, and I need to talk to you, was about barbed wire. We had barbed wire fences, and climbing over barbed wire and through barbed wire. And I remember very early on my mother having to get out of the car. We're all in this little 1941 Ford thing. And she has to get out and open the gate, which is you have to put your arm around it, take the loop off, open it up, drive the car through, come back. That was a real pain. Really a big pain.
No remote controls then?
No remote controls, no automatic gates like this. And eventually I think my grandfather kind of fenced the cattle off, so I don't remember because later, and probably because my mother complained so much about that, that in later years you could just drive right all the way out to North Gate, not having to go through those fences. And my grandfather, I'm sure, installed the cattle guards going down, I remember the cattle guards going down the west road, which also made divisions because they had to keep, you know.
The chicken coop, did you have trouble with predators?
No, because chickens are smart. They go in to roost, and if you shut up the little door. So we had no skunks, no possums, no foxes, no coons, no
coyotes, none of that?
None of that. I never had a lost chicken to the best of my knowledge.
Good.
Not even chicken hawks. So I had no loss of life in my chickens outside of our decapitated.
That can be a problem.
They can be, but I think most wildlife, if they have enough space and food, they will choose the wild environment. And it's only if they're very desperately pushed out of their habitat will they start impinging on people. So the coyotes had, you were telling me about the coyote Mariah,
Mm-hmm.
and that's about as close as we ever saw them.
Okay, good.
I've seen more coyotes in my mobile home park in Oceanside, California than I ever saw in the
Never
range.
saw here. Go figure.
Yeah, but that's just because the coyotes were pushed, and coyotes are very adaptable to urban living. I don't know if you have them here, but...
Oh, they're all through the green belts and the backcountry open areas.
Okay.
Yeah, they're quite
And you will have rabbits, and I'm sure you have the ground, you know, the chipmunks and the mice and the squirrels and everything for them to feed on.
We were taking a tour with the Highlands Ranch Community Association backcountry just last week, and one of the naturalists that's on their staff was saying that the number of coyotes is down. It goes in cycles.
Mm-hmm.
But they've been down because of some disease that affects the mice.
Mange.
Yeah, their food supply, and so their numbers are down. So some of the things that they prey on, like rabbits, are up considerably.
Mm-hmm.
These things go in cycles.
They do.
Yeah.
And so does the weather.
It does, and we see them quite a bit.
But it's interesting that because the coyotes are adaptable to urban existence, that I'm not surprised to know that a lot of your people here get to experience at least that form. I don't know if you have any deer, but...
Yeah, we have some.
You do? Good. I mean,
You can go 5 miles south of here into the backcountry and see tons of elk and deer
okay.
at the right time of day.
And
They're there.
do you have the wild turkey too?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
big time.
Big time. So that's one of the joys of, as you say, living in Highlands Ranch. You get to have that kind of adventure,
so close.
and you don't have to go to the Denver Zoo.
That's right, and they're so close. If you drive down to Tweet's place down at Cherokee Ranch, right toward the entrance there off of Daniels Park Road, they're almost a nuisance. They're so close and are on the road frequently.
And are not afraid of human,
Unfortunately, that's true.
unfortunately. Yeah.
Same thing can be said for the fox and everything else.
Yeah. Well, we hunted coyote on the Arapaho hunt rather than fox. I don't think I've ever seen a fox in this country.
We've seen them in the suburban neighborhoods
Have
where
you?
we grew up. Yeah, quite a few. Actually, we had some personal experiences. But let me get back to the topic that I started to ask about was some of the plantings around the Young house.
Okay, my parents...
I assume none of it was original, so you all must have planted.
Oh yes, we planted everything,
So
and it was...
What did you plant and why?
Mostly, we left very carefully in place several pines, and they're still there.
Was that primarily for windbreak reasons?
No, I think
Or
just,
shade,
well, pines don't really give that good a shade. They really don't. But they do add greenery, they do add landscaping, And we planted a lot of those, and that was what struck me so strongly in '09, that the pine trees we put in, you know, with little guys this high, suddenly everything, and the circumference of the trunks is just so overwhelming to me. In fact, those trees kind of completely changed the character of that house the way I remember it. And only one plant of the what we call the miniature locust beans, and we had a whole hedge of that around that south lawn. I think I was explaining that to you, the original plantings when we walked around there the other day. And the locusts, or is it the oak tree that we planted just outside the south wing? We planted that there just, I think, to shade that south aspect. And we had a great big cottonwood immediately west of the house that's no longer there. And that shaded all those west windows into the living room.
Nice.
And that is no longer there because cottonwoods have a shorter life cycle.
They do. What about the locust you said on the north side?
Yeah, there's only one plant down on the circular driveway and there at the Chum Howe house, just outside of the garage. And I think I pointed that out and I said, this is the only one of these plants that still seems, you know, of the original things that I remember.
There's a red building off the north side of the Young house. Was it there when you were there? And what was it used for?
We built that.
What was it used for?
At one time we had a woodworking shop. My brother Chan had a dark room in that area. That's where we kept our comic book collection. Archie and his friends, and Jughead and Veronica and all those guys, and the Superman comics and the early Batman comics and those sorts of things. That's when they were 5 cents or something instead of $1.50.
Yeah, they'd be quite valuable now, I suspect.
Oh, I suspect they would be. And so we had that. And the other interesting thing in books, my parents had complete sets of Balzac, of Sinclair Lewis, Encyclopedia Britannica, of course, none of which were helpful to us as children, even up through the grade school levels while we were there. And so I was reading that sort of literature because we didn't have a library card in Littleton. And it was too far. I don't think Castle Rock had a library. I don't even think the town had a library. They had the Carnegie Library in Littleton, and I do remember that library and Mr. Green's pharmacy and the Littleton post office, the original one, and the Arapahoe County offices, because that's where the Swaffords went in to see Chick Foster. And also Roberta Munn, who was the Swafford's daughter, also worked in that building in a clerical capacity for years. And I think she retired from there.
Okay, well, Suzanne, let's switch topics. You were living very close to the mansion where Lawrence Jr.'s family lived. Tell me about the kind of interactions you had with that family. I'm not sure who lived there other than Lawrence's grandfather, and his, Lawrence III, I'm sure, was there at some point.
Oh, he and his siblings came down every 4th of July, and when you have your interview with Lawrence, he will tell you more about that. Lawrence, Richmond, and Henry were all from my grandfather's second marriage. And so Lawrence was only a few years older than my brother. So my grandfather was having children about the time his first daughters were having children. And the same thing happened with my great-grandfather. So, and I'll get in. Well, if you have the genealogy of my great-grandfather, you can see that my mother is older than her uncles, Alan and Jerry.
Okay.
So, Alan and Jerry. So that'll be very fun for you to sort out the family genealogy.
So how much interaction did you play together as children? Did you have family dinners together? Did you have holidays or any memories in any of those areas, or
no,
your own family?
Yeah. I wrote down on my paper in my notes for you, which were called annual events. And of course, a big thing was the dipping and branding. That was an annual thing. We all pitched in, and even my brother Chan, when he got old enough.
And when did that happen during the year?
That wasn't during the 40s. And
I mean, what time of the year? April, May?
Whenever they brand cattle. I'm thinking that when the calves are old enough. And an interesting thing, it's a side note, my grandfather gave each of us, each year, he gave each of us a yearling heifer as a Christmas present. And as those cattle, those heifers had children, if they were male, they were fattened as beef, and the money went into our account. And if the heifer had a heifer, we grew our own herd, and that financed my college education.
Wonderful. Were they kept separately from the rest of the herd?
No. They were earmarked. Have you ever heard of notching the ears on cattle?
I've heard of ear tags.
Yeah, well, not even ear tags. They actually notched the ear of the animal. Remember I told you Bob Swalford could look at a cow and a calf and tell this cow and calf from this cow and calf? So he would identify the calf and say, okay, the cow has a notch for Suzanna Ray. I mean, for Susie.
So there were different notches then?
They made different kind of notches for each generation. And that was done at the same time. They brought the cattle in, they did the castration, they did the branding, they did the ear notching, they did the dipping. And I show on one of my maps the dipping that we had.
So not being from a cattle family, what was the purpose of dipping?
Mostly to get rid of the flies and the things that make cows itch and just generally health. That was something that came in the early 30s, maybe as soon as cattlemen recognized that their herd was a lot more healthy. If they could eliminate the ticks, the flies, and a lot of other skin diseases that cattle might be subject to.
I know my dog's not real happy when she gets a bath or whatever. I suspect the cattle weren't
No, we put them
very happy about this process.
Oh no, this is my one job, because I certainly wasn't going to be holding a hind leg or a tail as they branded a calf.
Yeah.
So my job was to hold occasionally I'd get to use a cow prod, which would give an electric shock, because we ran those cattle down a chute. And when they got to where they had to jump into the river, they were not happy. And we'd have to give them a shock, and they finally would jump in, have to swim, climb out to the other side.
And when you said the river, do you mean?
Not the river, the dipping vat. But yeah, but cattle can swim. And when they brought the herds in from Mexico.
I've seen too many of these Western movies.
Movies where, yeah.
They have to ford a river.
They have to ford a river, and the cattle have to swim.
Yeah.
And I guess the buffalo, I don't know whether they did that too. I've never seen a buffalo swim, but if a cow can, I suspect a buffalo will also. So you'll have to talk to somebody like Bill Sinclair, who's still doing cattle, to really find out a lot about their behavior.
Okay. Well, that was one event. What were the other events you talked about in your paper?
The 4th of July fireworks. And of course that started, I would think when I was probably 10, maybe 12. Grandfather got some really, really spectacular, the kind that would go out and make these starbursts, which was very unusual and very expensive at the time. And everybody on the ranch sat on the steps in front of the mansion.
Facing north?
Facing north, and the fireworks were set off by responsible gentlemen in that, because the circle drive at that time wasn't all cemented in, there was actually a green area in front of that circle drive, and that's where the fireworks were set off.
Trees around that lane weren't too high then?
No. And that's the other thing I noticed, that those trees that were carefully planted up that avenue have now grown.
They're big.
They're big and they're tremendous, and as I said, everything's bigger. And let's see, the other...
What else did you do in the 4th of July weekend other than watch fireworks? Did you have a barbecue, or what were your activities?
I think that was the highlight of the thing. I don't ever remember us having the one communal meal we had at the ranch annually was the bunkhouse Thanksgiving. Everybody on the ranch went, and they set up great long boards, and my father, being a Presbyterian, was the only one who knew how to pray out loud, and he always got to do.
Where was the setup? You said long tables? Where was it?
In the bunkhouse.
Actually in the bunkhouse?
In the bunkhouse dining room. Now I would like to go back.
That's fairly small, isn't it? It's in the middle of the bunkhouse building.
I mean, yes. And I would love to get back into those. But even when I made the tour in '09, I don't think we got to go in except to look in where the cowboys used to sleep, and the roof was falling in, it was all rotten and all that sort of thing. But where there were actually habitation and use by the Clow cattle operation, we were not allowed in that in '09.
But long tables were set up, and who fixed the food?
We had a ranch cook, and she was there for years and years. I don't remember her last name.
She cooked probably in the kitchen area of the bunkhouse, as opposed to the main house kitchen?
Yep. And we had a lot of people who lived on the ranch, everything from Jim Tedder, who cared for the lawns and all the maintenance.
Can you spell that one?
I think remembering the name is Tedder, Tedder. My brother Chan is vaguely thinking Tanner, but we will need to research that. But he had a sprinkler, a walking sprinkler with arms on it, and that would go up and down that great big huge lawn, and then he had a great big mower with wings on it. It was motorized, sort of as a walk behind, not a ride along mower. And he worked 24/7, just doing the lawn inside that perimeter stone fence for the mansion itself. That was a full-time job. He ate at the bunkhouse. Mr. Leach, who did the milking, we had a few cattle, and all the ranch families were given as much milk as they wanted, and cream.
And was the rest sold off?
I don't think there was really that much extra. If we only had 2 or 3 cows, and you had that many people, I know that we got about a gallon of milk a day, and that probably was enough for our family. And we had, at one point, let's see if Pam was born at that time, Pam, Stephen, Greg. There were 6 of us, plus my mother and dad, going through the milk at that time, and making our own butter. This is another memory of churning butter, particularly at Mount Swafford, because she had one of those kind. And
getting back to the ranch dinner on the annual thing, how many people came to that on average?
Gee, I didn't even think to count them, But if I added up all the staffing that I've written on
So it
that,
was your family, the people who lived in the cottages, all the people who lived in the ranch, the people in the bunkhouse, the people in the main house.
all came down. My grandfather was the host. Rarely saw Lainey. She never came to those events, but my grandfather did sort of host that. And that's one of the few occasions we saw him.
Did you mention he was Presbyterian?
No, my dad was.
Your dad was.
That's how come he was able to say a prayer out loud.
Yeah, Lawrence II is buried in next to an Episcopal church down south of Sedalia in the Belcanto Cemetery.
Yeah, in the Bear Canyon.
Bear Canyon.
Bear Canyon. And my parents are buried there also.
Are they there? Mm-hmm.
So I got the picture of my parents' gravestones. I couldn't find grandfather. It took me an hour to find my parents' gravestones.
Well, at some point you might want to look at findagrave.com
Okay.
if you have access to a website.
Well, I now know where it is because I talked to Joanne Claire and she told me where it was.
Yeah, I've been down there a couple times.
Yeah.
So
It's
I have pictures at least of Lawrence and Elaine's grave.
Yeah. And it's interesting that she's buried there. I thought she was buried up in Wyoming. Did she come back down and was interred there?
I don't know. I just know her gravestone is right next to his.
Well, if it is, then maybe she was, because I wasn't around when
I
she
don't know
died.
any different.
Yeah, but I know for many, many years she did live up in Wyoming with her brother, and that's where a lot of those...
This is after Lawrence II died?
Many, many years later. Lainey lived, I'm sure, a full decade or more after grandfather died. And he
Yeah, that's
died...
my understanding is that she passed later.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know after they moved out in the mid-70s of where she was living.
Yeah. In Denver for a while, and then we understood she went up to stay with her brother. And that's where a lot of the carriages and coaches we played in, a Surrey with the fringe on top even. We were having a big discussion as a family when we toured last Friday with which of those buildings the carriages were in. And say, well, this is the only one that's big enough to put a Surrey with a fringe on top or an enclosed.
Wouldn't it be in the carriage house?
No, what you call the carriage house was a five-car garage with automotive equipment in it.
But these are the old-fashioned carriages.
1900 circa. I mean,
Like
when do you find in...
Like you'd find in Claremore, Oklahoma.
Yeah. Or in the sound, in really genuine, when they made the musical of Oklahoma.
Yeah.
You know, they're riding along in a little genuine Surrey with the fringe on top, and they
Claire Curley in that movie says that he had rented the rig in Claremore.
Oh, okay.
Oklahoma.
Okay.
That he had to rent it from someplace in a big town.
Oh, well, but they had livery stables in every town. Mm-hmm. And the people that were not local, just like I rent a Hertz car for while I'm here, they would rent either a buckboard or a Surrey or a great big wagon because they had to transport, hay or whatever they were transporting.
Teamsters.
And that was a large, every truck driver you see today was a Teamster then and probably then some. Okay. And so that was one of our adventures. I mentioned all the places we played.
Getting back to annual events, any more come to mind? You talked about the rancher's dinner. You talked about the 4th of July. Thanksgiving.
And then, of course, in the mid-50s, we started going to the Douglas County Fair, but that's not on the ranch. But we had a lot of 4-H projects on the ranch, which, of course, was a big...
Did you win any awards over the years?
Well, I know my brother Chapman was able to show his steer at the National Western. Mm-hmm. So it placed high enough at the Douglas County Fair, which I might mention had outside toilets at the time we participated there.
Yeah. Have you been down to the fairgrounds now?
I went very shortly when I was here in '09, and I understand from people in the family it's even more.
It's big.
It's bigger and fancier and more.
Toilets are indoors now. And they just missed it. I think it was a couple weekends ago.
Oh yes. And I was informed. I said, "Gee, I could have gone. I was here in time. I didn't." But as I said, my two brothers and I was hanging out at the ranch, getting adjusted to the altitude here.
I'll bet.
Yeah.
You live now where?
I live in Oceanside, California.
What took you out to there?
To be married with David Ray, who was my second husband. Mm-hmm. I had been a singer.
Did he grow up there, or was that an area you just decided to go to?
It was an area he decided to go to. He came from the Northwest, up at the Port Angeles area where it rains all the time, and he wanted to get to the sun, so he came to Denver because he remembered, hey, there's a lot of sun, but he couldn't handle the altitude.
A lot of people can't for health reasons.
Yeah.
They have to go lower.
In fact, we had a lot of friends who were natives that had to go to lower climate, lower altitude for their health.
I've heard that a lot.
And so that is true, and a lot of people that we knew back in the old days did precisely that as they grew up.
So Oceanside is north of Los Angeles, south of San Francisco?
I would say halfway between Los Angeles and San Diego, Southern California.
Oh, it's south of that. Okay.
We're right. In fact, I can see the hills of Camp Pendleton, so if anybody has any military background. And Oceanside, because people who were stationed at Camp Pendleton, when they retired, guess where they wanted to go back to?
Sure.
They went to Oceanside, and we have a tremendous population of retired veterans in Oceanside. And so I lived there for the same reason that just climate. You don't go from 35 below
right.
up to, however hot it gets in Colorado, and it's...
you can get up to 105 around here.
Yeah, and except that it's like a blast from a hot air furnace when you walk out here. In other climates, you feel like you're just stepping into a steam room.
Yeah.
And at least Colorado has the advantage of the humidity being less.
Yes.
Makes it more amenable.
Okay, switching topics again, just so I make sure to cover it. There's a big ranch to the south of here, which used to be run by a lady named Tweet Kimball. Mm-hmm. And when she came out here, she bought an existing stone castle built by a guy named Johnson in the 20s. Mm-hmm. I believe she came out here in the 50s.
Yes, she did.
Brought some cattle out here of a particular type and became quite well known for various reasons in the area. And she named her ranch Cherokee Ranch, which now has been given to one of the Douglas County foundations
as open
conservation easement and open space area, if you will, that'll be preserved and not developed. Mm-hmm. You living on a very large ranch, the Highlands Ranch, the Phipps family, wondering if there was any interaction, if so, what it was with Tweet Kimball's Cherokee Ranch or the people there.
Well, I had to ask Lawrence III this question: how did grandfather get along with Tweet? And his simple answer was, he didn't.
He didn't?
Many people did not get along with Tweet. She was a very strong-willed.
Was there any interaction at all?
I doubt it. I think they politely ignored each other.
Okay.
As you do with people that you do not particularly want to associate with.
Sure.
You may be polite to them. However, you turn away and start talking to the person next to you.
You don't socialize and have drinks with them.
No, you do not. And as I mentioned before, because of Elaine's health problems, she never entertained. I was telling all your docents this, that grandfather never, ever ever.
For the purpose of this interview, let's talk about that a little bit more. The person you're talking to is who?
Elaine Oakes.
And that is Lawrence II's
Third wife, who he married.
Third and last wife.
And whom he married just right after the war.
Mm-hmm.
And she was a Van Houten. And I remember going to her grandmother's house. It was a very large, opulent property west of Denver at that time. So she came from a moneyed background.
Mm-hmm. And he married late. They didn't have children, did they?
They had no children at all. And
I'm told that she was a local artist.
No. She dabbled in doing things. She had the most beautiful, elaborate miniature dollhouse I have ever seen in my life.
Where was it kept?
Well, the last time I saw it, it was in one of the rooms that you converted into your conference rooms at the mansion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
She took up one of those whole rooms.
With the dollhouse.
With this, just the most detailed, absolute thing. And that was sort of a hobby of hers. And I know she had a friend, or a companion named Inga Thompson, who I believe was getting her master's degree at Denver University, and she wrote a biography of my great-grandfather.
Didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. So Lainey had a companion. Of course, grandfather, went into the office. So at least she and Inga got along just dandy, and I'm glad she had company.
Sure.
Otherwise, she would have been isolated. When I look upon it, I was, as a child, very isolated because I was the only one of 3 girls who lived on the ranch.
Yeah. One
was Maybrit Nelson, myself, and little Sally McLean, who was, hey, I'm a 6th grader and she's a 1st grader, as I say. Maybrit was a couple of years older than I, but hey, we sort of hang out, but we were never really friends. We were just the only 2 girls on the ranch. I mean, it's somebody who's at least female. So that's why I danced a lot and of course did my chores and took all that, being the substitute mother's role very seriously. It took up a lot of my time. And when I was making my notes, I realized that we actually spent more time in school than we did at the house, if you think about any child now. Mm-hmm. And add to that the commute time, the wait time, the when am I going to get picked up time. Mm-hmm. It adds several hours to the school day. So a child's memory is very school-oriented. Very school-oriented.
But you brought up Elaine because you mentioned that she wasn't, as the 3rd wife, she wasn't a great entertainer.
No. So she, as I said.
So they didn't have big parties or all-inclusive family gatherings, with the exception of the few of the annual events that you had mentioned. And
as I said, after grandfather was older, when he was failing, and my great-grandfather never had Christmas parties anymore. They sold the bell carol.
They would go to the great-grandfather's mansion there.
Yeah, that's where we did Christmas, with all the aunts from Pasadena, California, all the aunts from Philadelphia, all the aunts from all that sort of places.
You have memories yourself of those Christmases?
Oh, yes. The Bell Carroll, the whole Bell Carroll mansion was as familiar to us, except for the living quarters where my great-grandfather and Margaret lived, Margaret Rogers.
I'm only familiar with the tennis house.
Oh, you're only familiar with, because that's where you're allowed in now.
Right.
But Margaret was a great tennis player. She was also patron of the Denver Symphonians, the Denver Symphony, and Saul Kasten. And
Margaret was Lawrence the first
yeah,
wife, or which wife?
third.
Third wife also.
Yeah. So, and her two sons were Alan and Jerry Phipps, who purchased the Broncos. And
In about 1960.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so, and of course, I grew up with all the cousins, Alan's children, and they were sort of our Christmas cousins.
You would see them at Christmas, because you mentioned you were pretty isolated
Here.
the rest of the year, and they didn't do lots of communal things with that exception.
Yeah. But we had a humdinger of a beautiful Christmas party.
Tell me about it.
Well, as I said, Belcaro was, to me, about as familiar as grandfather's mansion, the Highlands Mansion.
You just weren't there very often.
No, but just Christmas time, and we used to go swimming. They had last time I was there, when my sister Pamela was married in that facility. And that was 19 woo. Don't ask me to call that right now. 60, 70, 80, 2 or 3, maybe something like that. Maybe 85.
You were swimming there what time of the year?
Summertime.
Summer. So you had an outdoor pool.
She had an outdoor pool. That it really was a reflecting pool, but it was 3 feet deep the whole time, which was just fabulous for children. And so we would, every time the family went in to Denver, it was a big event. And quite often we would just stop by to do that sort of thing. I guess my mother talked with grandfather or Margaret or something. But us kids did that. And the famous story is the paper airplane that my brother Michael, you know how you used to fold up the paper airplanes?
Sure.
Got stuck up in the organ pipes.
Oh.
And we found it years later. When they finally had to, retune that or something, they found that paper airplane. What's this paper airplane doing up here in the organ pipes? So there are little things that you remember as a child, mostly because they happen because of mischief. You know, what children do.
Sure.
And that's one of my favorite stories, and you will have this confirmed my cousin Diana, Dee Dee, I call her Diana Riley, who was the second child of Lawrence's second daughter. My mother was the first daughter. Diana was the second daughter.
Second daughter. Okay.
And then the third one was Joan, and of course you're all probably more familiar with, because her picture is now in the mansion.
Yep.
And I promised to bring you something on my iPad of my mother's picture. Plus a piece of furniture that she inherited, or it was sort of, Lainey said, you pick one thing or take this or something. I'm not sure how my mother ended up with the great big sea chest or wood chest that was in the Great Hall, and also
the Great Hall of
the tower entrance,
okay.
The front door
of
entrance
the Highlands Ranch
of the Highlands Ranch now. That I called that the grand staircase room. I guess people get to see that. Everybody, of course, goes through the portico off the porch now, rather than going in through the front door. But
right. But it gets to the same place.
It gets to the same place. It gets to that great big terrazzo marble edify. And so I started to tell you about Dee Dee and the most memorable things we ever did. We set the whole North Field on fire. We were burning trash. At the tender age of tender age of 9 and 10, and fortunately the cattle crew was just coming in at the time, but it took every man on the ranch with wet burlap bags trying to put out the grass fire before it burned down the whole place.
When you were here Friday, and we went over to the Young house, the Chum Howe house, you mentioned there was a gap in between the main Highlands Ranch Mansion and your house that you called Rattlesnake Alley.
Yes.
Is that true? Tell me more about that.
That whole space between where all the parking now lies was a wild, what I call wild grass and cactus pasture. We planted the pine trees in there, and you'll notice the size of them now. But I told you I went to see my adopted grandmother Cocky all the time. So I went up that path, slipped between the bars of that stone railing. I want to see if I can still make it. That's why I bought this outfit, so I can these tours. I want to see if I can still get between, those railings. Slipped between those, cut across the big lawn, and made right for the gate that went down to the headquarters on the cattle operation there, through those gates into the Cloud property now.
Yeah.
And so I just stepped over this nice brown-looking thing with things, and as I said, it was fortunate. My parents, they never mess with wildlife, and I'm glad I did. I just stepped over this thing laying across the path. And when I was describing this to Cocky, she turned a little. Then she had to tell my parents that I had stepped over a diamondback rattlesnake. And he was big. Probably. So he could have done me some damage if I had kicked him or tickled him or done something weird.
Good.
So that's my own private confession. But of course...
And you lived to tell about it.
I lived to tell about it. And my parents, of course, they have repeated that down because they had to tell everybody in the family about it after it was reported to them. So it's sort of family legend.
Okay. So we're at about an hour and 45 minutes in.
Okay.
We certainly don't want to wear you out today.
Oh, I'm doing fine.
In conclusion, are there any other outstanding memories of life at the ranch or in the house or growing up in this area you'd like to include?
I mentioned all the school activities and all the enrichment we did with that. I mentioned the relative dearth of female companionship growing up. I'm glad I'm an introvert. I'm trying to think of, and our activities, what else did I make notes? I've got lots of little scribbled things on my notes that you might want to look at that and say, what about this? And we can tape a little bit longer after you take a look at that list, because I might have some things on there and you say, what does this mean? So if you want to take a break and then take a moment to look at that list, you might have more questions.
We've got lunch plans and we have things to do in the afternoon, so we'll consider this the conclusion of this oral session, recorded today, Tuesday, August 19th.
And hopefully I can...
Highlands Ranch, and we want to thank you on behalf of the Highlands Ranch Historical Society for being so cooperative, having such wonderful recall back over 70 plus years at this point with wonderful humorous stories. 2014.
Oh, we're collecting.
That's when we're collecting this. August 19th, 2014 in Highlands Ranch. So Suzanna with a Z, Ray, thank you very much for your oral history today.
And your time, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.